Do you know who Theodore Roosevelt is? Do you understand what the Progressive Party is? Welcome judges, students, and audience. Theodore Roosevelt was the 26th President of the United States. He was a politician of the Progressive Party. He focused on the improvement of the country and the preservation of the land and its people. He protected national parks, started workers' rights, and became a symbol of the people. These are examples of him taking care of his country and his fellow citizens. We need to be more like him, taking care of one another and protecting this beautiful country. Theodore Roosevelt once stated, this country will not be a good place for any of us to live in unless we make it a good place for all of us to live in. I believe this to be a true statement because as citizens, we should protect one another, take care of everyone, and protect the land. Initially, to start making this country a better place, we need to get to know one another. Everyone in this room today has survived through a COVID pandemic. We were forced into lockdown, closing doors and limiting interactions. And while people are still skeptical about this, we need to start opening up. Get to know your neighbors, invite them over, or just have a little chat. Only 50% of people know 2 to 4 neighbors. 25% of people know all of their neighbors, and 25% of people don't know any of our neighbors. When we close our doors, especially to those around us, we can cause distance in our community. This can cause a divide in our neighborhood, or looking at it from a bigger perspective, the country. We need to show that we care about the people around us because they can help us make this country a better place. Once we connect to those around us, we can fix the pollution problem at hand. Just in Peoria, 30 in a million people suffer from cancer from air toxins every year, according to the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. This puts us at a larger risk for lung cancer than most of the state. As well as horrible air toxins, we have a lot of garbage to pick up. According to the UN Environmental Program, we produce about 400 million tons of plastic waste every year. About 75 to 199 million of that ends up in our oceans. We are harming our environment, and to change that, it takes a united country. We can have businesses use solar panels instead of wasting electricity or burning fossil fuels. And while it's not the cheapest option, there are electric cars on the market which can bring down carbon monoxide levels. We need to find more ways to get rid of garbage without stuffing it in our lands or burning it into the air. We need to focus on recycling efforts. A reusable water bottle is a cheap option. Reusable water bottles are only 84 cents according to Amazon. And while the ones at the gas station are easier to get, they're not necessarily better. But if you can't get a reusable water bottle, find a recycling can. There are many unique products made from recycled materials. While picking up the country helps, we still need to protect and serve the people of this country. When we serve in our community, we call upon our duty of being a citizen to protect and take care of one another. We can volunteer in a local public library or maybe a food shelter. In fact, we encourage our youth to explore helping in the community through clubs like Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts. When we serve in the community, we provide a safe and comfortable space for everyone. We make sure citizens are fed and have access to resources like food, water, and an air-conditioned building to escape the Arizona heat. We need to build a better community, making this a great place for everyone to live in. We need to protect and provide for those who are less fortunate than ourselves. Theodore Roosevelt once stated, "This country will not be a good place for any of us to live in unless we make it a good place for all of us to live in." We need to hold ourselves and others accountable for protecting this country. We need to be united. The U.S. is nothing without unity, and as a country and as citizens, we need to make sure that we are there for one another. We need to be grateful for the land and all that it has given us. Now remember to say hi to your neighbors, pick up your trash, but most importantly, serve your country. Thank you.
Have you ever heard of the butterfly effect? The butterfly effect has to do with a small action, such as a butterfly flapping its wings, can create a typhoon in another part of the world. A small action can have a big effect. Theodore Roosevelt once said, this country will not be a good place for any of us to live in unless we make it a good place for all of us to live in. From this quote, I can see that he had the same idea. This country will not be good for any of us to live in if we don't take responsibility of the small actions that we do for it. The world today has changed immensely from what it was over 100 years ago when Theodore Roosevelt was president. Today we have gun control, institutional racism, and an ongoing pandemic to contend with. However, the small actions that we citizens take can make a better country for all of us to live in. This famous quote still resonates with the country we are living in today. There are many ways we can improve the United States, both big and small, which is why we still need to take responsibility for our actions to build the country that we want to live in. Anytime you turn on the news, you can see these actions on a larger scale and the effect that they have on our country. An example of a larger action is a gathering of like-minded people that can affect the ideals, politics, and views of this country. This gathering could be called a protest or a public expression of objection, and it can be big or small. A large subject of protest are school shootings that have become normal in our country. On January 6th, a first-grade teacher was shot by her 6-year-old student. It's sad to think that we have become used to these reports of school shootings on the news. To protect students, protests have happened all over the country to protect the society and everyone around us. In 2022 alone, there were over 450 marches in different capitals of the country. These demonstrations of disapproval led to over 11 states curbing their gun violence laws, making it safer for communities and students everywhere. Although our world may look different on the outside, the sources of our struggles and goals are the same. There are many ways we can improve the United States, both big and small, even though we may not see it. If the small actions in the right direction can make a large impact that we want for the future of our country. Generally, we don't notice how the actions of like-minded people gathering can affect our country, but I can say that it makes a difference. As Theodore Roosevelt said, this country will not be a good place for any of us to live in unless we make it a good place for all of us to live in. A few of the most witnessed protests originate from the disapproval of how the government is handling the racism that still lives in our country. When Theodore Roosevelt made his speech, the topic of racism existed and still does today. In 2020, George Floyd was brutally killed and the Black Lives Matter movement became a national priority. With over 7,500 protests connected to this movement, our country now has new laws that restrict police's use of force, neck restraints, and require officers to intervene when their colleagues use excessive force. One of the most prominent and impactful laws that has been updated since these marches is the requirement of officers to intervene in order to prevent excessive use of force by fellow officers. This law has not been revised or updated by the Department of Justice in over 18 years. It now provides officers with training to recognize and act upon the affirmative duty to intervene, prevent, or stop excessive force when witnessed. It also includes additional training of medical aid if excessive practice of force was used. We can all thank the citizens who made the decision to come together fighting for justice and the positive impact that they had on the country that we live in. Over the last few years, this country experienced something I think Theodore Roosevelt never expected, a pandemic. Across a span of 3 years, more than 1 million deaths were reported to the fatal disease known as the coronavirus. This virus forced us all to make small choices that we must make every day. These decisions can make our country a great place for all of us to live in if we think of the larger outcomes. At the peak of the pandemic, each individual citizen was asked to wear a mask. Studies show that if 95% of people wore a mask, nearly 130,000 lives could have been saved. That being said, the majority took the small step of wearing a mask, were able to stop the spread of the coronavirus, and can now smile freely with family and loved ones. Small actions making a big difference is the basis of the butterfly effect, and I think this is a reminder of what our individual responsibility can do as well. If we want to make this country a place for everyone to live in, we need to continue to not only focus on the large possibilities, but the small actions to arrive at that same goal. We are a nation of immigrants and need to each take responsibility as both individuals and a whole of how we want this country to be. I'm a 4th-generation immigrant, as my great-nana came from Mexico with her parents seeking refuge and a better future for her family. She had a dream of living in a great country where there is equality, safety, and justice for all, and I'm here today because of her. We may all have different backgrounds, opinions, and expectations, but at the end of the day, we all have an obligation to make this country great. As Theodore Roosevelt said, this country will not be a good place for any of us to live in unless we make it a good place for all of us to live in. This is still true today, and we're all blessed to be here. In order to keep this country good for everyone, both citizens and immigrants, we need to continue to take action, both big and small.
Firstly, I'd like to welcome judges, parents, and fellow contestants. My name is Brody Wynn, and I am here representing Sunset Heights Elementary. The Pledge of Allegiance, the Constitution, the Star-Spangled Banner, an anthem sung by thousands and thousands of Americans in unison but as one voice, filling stadiums across our nation. All of these writings represent our country and their patriotism. However, I think there is a more important writing, the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Independence was written July 4th, 1776 by Thomas Jefferson and was signed on August 2nd, 1776 by the Second Continental Congress. This document is one of the most iconic and patriotic U.S. documents. Among other things, it states that all men are created equal, that people have inalienable rights, such as life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and that individuals have a civic duty to defend these rights for themselves and others. Regarding equality, the Declaration of Independence states that all men are created equal. The proclamation had profound implications for the American regime of liberty. The self-evident truth means a few different things: that humans had equal natural rights, equally gave their consent to create a republican government, had equal dignity, and were equal under the law. For instance, women in our country have the same rights as men do, but in other countries they're still known as second-class citizens. That's what's great about equality. Everyone has the same rights and freedoms. This leads me to the next patriotic idea in the Declaration of Independence, which is that people have inalienable rights, including life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These rights are essential to the dignity and capacity for freedom woven into human nature. You may be asking, but what do those rights really mean? Life is a process which creates itself, resulting in an unending flowering of forms. Liberty is a state of being free of unnecessary restrictions, being free to make your own choices, being free to live your own life. The pursuit of happiness, the attempt to achieve and maintain that state of open-heartedness. For example, I have the right to be whatever I want to be when I'm older, whether it's a pro NFL player, a teacher, or even an astronaut. I can do whatever will make me happy. The point is that life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness are rights that people have and deserve, and they are also rights that people can fight for. This leads me to yet another patriotic idea, which is that the Declaration of Independence considers it an individual's civic duty to defend these rights for themselves and others. To carry out one's civic duty is to honor the implicit contract between the government and the people. There are two types of civic duties: civic obligations and civic responsibilities. Civic obligations are actions citizens must take to participate in society and avoid legal repercussions. Civic responsibilities are fundamental ways to contribute to society. In our country, we have the right to vote against and protest our government. This statement exemplifies the right we have to be able to stand up for our beliefs. As you've heard, the Declaration of Independence is definitely one of the most iconic and patriotic U.S. documents. Not only did it represent our country in many ways, but it also helped unite our country and showed us our true potential. America is a great country, and the Declaration of Independence only helped contribute to its success. The Declaration of Independence is one of the reasons that makes me proud to be an American.
Through the eyes of a young boy, the world, in which is supposed to be a kind, jovial place. But now it is slowly turning their back on him because of the color of his skin, or maybe his gender, or their religion. Any of these are not what a child should be going through. And yet, it happens every day. Would you want your child to go through this? We need to change. And here's how. First, we need to get rid of racial discrimination. Martin Luther King was a man who helped minimize social injustice in the United States. His famous "I Have a Dream" speech impacted the lives of many. Even then, there was still very little change. Racism still lives on, and we must crush it together by any means necessary. Malcolm X was another civil rights activist that was killed for his beliefs. Unlike Martin Luther King, he took a different, more aggressive approach to his problem. He believed that your voice wasn't the only thing that you could use to get your point across. If we set aside the differences that got these two men killed, we could get a lot more done. Sexism. It needs to end for the better of society. Sexism is discrimination against someone because of their sex. In other words, their gender. This can cause a lot of problems. We need to combat this. But unlike what most people are tricked into thinking, this isn't just happening to women. It's also happening to men as well. We need to end this for good. If we get our heads out the gutter and logically think, we need each other to survive. And with each generation, we are slowly widening the gap between us. Religious injustice is another big problem that we face in today's society. You shouldn't be scared to represent your god or gods. I'm sure most of the kids on this side of the room are familiar with who Logan Paul is. Yep. But did you know that he blatantly disrespected his friend George Janko because of his religion? Why would someone's so-called best friend do this to him? I bet this happens a lot more than all of you think. Every person should be able to freely express their God without being criticized for it. It's a right we all have as citizens. Theodore Roosevelt once said that this country will not be a good place to live in unless we make it a good place for all of us to live in. So let's band together, no matter the race, gender, or religious following, and make not only this country, but the whole world a better place for all of us.
McKenna Lee Elrod, Layla Salazar, Jose Manuel Flores Jr., Annabelle Guadalupe Rodriguez, Nevaeh Bravo, and Xavier Lopez. All the names I just said were children from 9 to 11 years old. These children were the victims of the Robb Elementary School shooting in Uvalde, Texas. Hello teachers, parents, and fellow students. My name is AMINA LARA, and today I want to bring up one of America's biggest problems, gun violence. Did you know that in the past 2 years, there have been 76 school shootings? That's right, 76 U.S. school shootings. This number may not seem like much to some of you, but to the parents that send their children to school every day, it is. These parents watch their kids walk into a school building and fear that their child will be the next victim of a school shooting. Children shouldn't have to go to school and the first thing they hear about be another school shooting. It's already bad enough that parents have to sit their children down and explain to them why they need to take extra precautions at school due to the shootings. Children have to see the videos in the news talking about the school violence, and these videos then give these children anxiety. Children are living with anxiety at such a young age because we as American citizens can't keep our firearm use under control. As Theodore Roosevelt once said, this country will not be a good place for any of us to live in unless we make it a good place for all of us to live in. Because we as American citizens have a responsibility, and that responsibility is to keep our children and our community safe. How do you expect to keep your children safe when you can't even send them to school to get an education without fear of gun violence? School shootings have become such a regular thing in today's world that some of them aren't even being talked about on news channels because they'd rather talk about things like celebrity gossip and the weather. We live in the land of the free, but how do you expect us to be free when we have to live in fear? Innocent children are dying. Families are grieving and America is deteriorating, all because of our lack of control on firearm usage. Sandy Hook Elementary. Does that name sound familiar to you? Well, if it doesn't, it should, because the Sandy Hook Elementary school shooting is known as one of the deadliest school shootings in U.S. history. This shooting occurred on December 14, 2012, when Adam Lanza had murdered his mother, then drove to Sandy Hook Elementary. When Adam had gotten to the elementary, he proceeded to empty 154 rounds in less than 5 minutes, which claimed 26 lives at the elementary. Those 26 lives weren't only students, but also staff at the school who risked their lives trying to save their students. Once law enforcement had entered the building, they had heard a series of shots and then found Lanza by one of the teacher's classroom doors where he had taken his own life. This shooting was so traumatic for not only the children and staff that worked at the school, but the community as well. It was so traumatic that they had demolished the school in 2014 and replaced it with a new building in 2016. Although this shooting occurred in 2012, families in the community are still having to grieve with the loss of their family members. America is slowly starting to be consumed by fear and violence. Children are starting to lose an opportunity to a good education due to firearms. We as a community and as American citizens can't continue to live in fear because of violence not only in our community, but in our country as a whole. We cannot let our next generation continue to suffer from violence in our communities. These children are the future of our country, but if we continue to ignore gun control, then America will continue to deteriorate. America will continue to deteriorate because our next generation will be so traumatized because of the shooting incidents that they will fear their peers and community. They will lock themselves inside in fear of another shooting. We cannot let our country continue to suffer. America is a free country, but we will all start to feel trapped and hopeless if we don't take care of our firearm crisis. This country will no longer be the land of the free if we continue to let these individuals attack our children and our communities. This is America, and we will fight for not only our country, but for the thousands of people and communities we have lost due to gun violence in our schools and our community. Gun violence in schools must stop, because if it doesn't, then America will continue to deteriorate. So please, as an American citizen, do your part in helping protect your community and your country. Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Ian Johnston. I would like to reflect on the following quote by Theodore Roosevelt. He said that this country will not be a good place for any of us to live in unless we make it a good place for all of us to live in. Now think about this quote and think what responsibility, if any, we have as fellow citizens. First off, for me, this quote means that if we want everyone to be happy or satisfied in this country, we will have to put in the effort. Theodore Roosevelt knew that for the United States to be a safe and comforting place, it would take work. Not just for the government to make bills like the civil rights in 1964 or the voting rights in 1965, but the people. We have jobs or a responsibility as humans. Many remarkable people knew what that job was. Martin Luther King Jr. knew he had a job. He knew what had to be done. That was change. He didn't have to risk losing his life to preach about how segregation was wrong and disgusting, but he did. George Washington didn't have to risk losing his life in the Revolutionary War against the British in 1775 through 1783, but he did. Neil Armstrong didn't have to fly into space to the moon 238,900 miles above Earth, but he did. All these world changers had one main thing in common. He didn't have to do anything, or as normal as me and you. The only difference is that they acted on what must be done and deliver. That is exactly what Theodore Roosevelt meant. Theodore Roosevelt wanted us to realize that for the U.S. to be great, we need to be the best possible version of ourselves. We don't have to be world changers, but just getting a little good could be a start. George Washington once said, "Happiness and moral duty are inseparably connected." This comes to the responsibility part. I'd like you to think about your responsibility. It doesn't have to be big or small, just think about it. All right, keep that in mind. The responsibility I think we have as fellow Americans is just this: to work hard every single day to be the best possible version of ourselves we can possibly be. Think about why we risk this whole planet not being happy as well as its future. I'll tell you why. These days it is greed, revenge, insecurity, or arrogance. You are either insecure and have no confidence, so you bring people down, or you're overconfident and think you have all the power and are mean to people. And it's super interesting to me because I've noticed people who are so insecure or jealous of one person that they target them. My question is, how does that satisfy them? There's a recent study that says 51% of Americans feel down, depressed, or hopeless. Why do we want that for us, our kids, their kids, and so on? Imagine the results if we smiled, if we tried to make others feel good instead of just ourselves. You could walk outside without feeling endangered. There would rarely be any attempts at suicide, and you feel love and security. Let me ask you, wouldn't you love to live in a world like that? There's a band called AGR. They have 3 brothers, Adam, Jack, and Ryan, that play music together. Adam, the oldest of the brothers, was getting his PhD while they all were touring. Sadly, he missed his PhD graduation. So, they brought an impromptu faux graduation to him. And on the video that captured this special moment, you see Jack and Ryan the happiest they could be. They were not jealous, they were just pure and genuinely happy that their brother succeeded. That is what life should be. Now, ponder all the results you can have with a simple, friendly little wave or smile. This country will not be a good place for any of us to live in until we make it a good place for all of us to live in. Think about this quote next time someone honks at you or yells at you, even if you didn't do anything wrong. And remember, it needs all of us to be kind. We can start with you. Now, what will you do next? Thank you for your time.
Good morning. Good morning, judges, contestants, friends, and family. My name is Veronica Ortiz, and today I'll be talking about why the Declaration of Independence was written, how it affected people then, and how it affects us today. The Declaration was written on July 4th, 1776, and is now held in the National Archives Museum. The Declaration was written by multiple important people and our founding fathers, like John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, and plenty more. The Declaration was written to inspire and initiate action of the people of that time to hold true to certain values and behaviors. Its goals were to announce the Its goals were to rally troops and was the announcement of the making of a new country, as well as explaining the colonists' right to happiness, and to ensure a pursuit of happiness. The most important statement comes last, that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be, independent states. It declares a break between Britain, their king, and to claim power as an independent nation. This affected people then more than anything else because it was at a time when America was in the beginning stages of becoming a great nation. The people of the country during that time needed great leadership, foundation, and direction of moral standards. Natural rights and social contracts were put forward in the Declaration. Few colonists desired independence from Britain, but as the American Revolution went on, Britain only made gestures of reuniting and promised to claim power with great force. When the Declaration was accepted, the sound of artillery and galloping horsemen spread the news. General George Washington had the document read to his troops, and his writing raised the morale of his soldiers. It affects us today because people's hearts are still the same. We are still fighting for the same liberties. In life, there will always be a battle for the pursuit of happiness, whether that be for our own happiness or our neighbors. The words, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by the Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness," have consistently had a significant impact on American culture. The Declaration has been used to support the expansion of American political and social democracy, even though the meanings of these phrases and the theories made for them have been the subject of unending arguments. In conclusion, the Declaration helped us then, and its meaning and message still holds true. The Declaration of Independence goes to show how such a small group of people can change the world by writing a document explaining the pursuit of happiness and the American dream. Thank you.
Today I'll be discussing Theodore Roosevelt's quote in detail and what it means to me. After Theodore Roosevelt's presidency, Theodore stated, "This country cannot be a permanently good place to live in unless we make it a reasonable place for all of us to live in." Theodore Roosevelt inspired a lot of Americans by giving the idea of being good to others. Since more immigrants were coming, there was a lot more diversity growing, which created discrimination amongst citizens. Theodore, seeing this, he states, "We cannot make this country a good place fighting each other, but by working together to build a better America." With all this in mind, what responsibility, if any, do we have to our fellow citizens and to our own country? And to that, his quote answers for the question. You cannot make this country a good place if you are not holding yourself responsible for your fellow citizens. Examples of this would be watching what you say, being respectful, and not being insensitive or selfish. By doing any of these actions, you can make this a good place to live in. Mahatma Gandhi once said, "Be the change that you want to see in this world. It starts with you and ends with you." The similarities between the two leaders elaborate their passion to make this country and really this world a better place for all of us to live in. How do we start? And most importantly, how do we do this? We do this in our communities, with our family, friends, teachers, students, and even fellow students. Both leaders saw potential in humanity and how we can unite together to build a better America. Gandhi's philosophy was built on a set of virtues. His virtues were truth, love, courage, and humility. The question I'd like you all to consider is, how do we live up to this as American citizens? Well, after Theodore Roosevelt's death, other leaders were born. Martin Luther King Jr. was one of them. He fought against injustice and promoted peace and kindness, and never engaged in violence. One of his questions regarding kindness, life's most purest and urgent question, is, what are you doing for others? Well, we can see fellow leaders asking questions for our fellow brothers and sisters, and the answer lies in each and every one of us. In conclusion, no matter which quote inspired you today, we can all work together to build a better America by choosing compassion and asking yourself if you too want to be known as a leader who made a difference. The choice is yours to make a difference in America. We can all do this, but it all relies on each and every one of us. Thank you.
Hello, judges, parents, and fellow contestants. My name is HAILEY BERG, and I believe that the most patriotic U.S. document in U.S. history is the Bill of Rights. Why? Well, the main thing that America is known for is our rights and our freedom, which is what the Bill of Rights is, of course, about. That is why so many people want citizenship to live here in America, to have their freedoms. They might live in a country like North Korea, for example, where they cannot vote or speak freely about their opinions about their leader. If they do, they might go to prison and or die. They have so many laws that are unfair, like they can only have certain haircuts, no international calls, and no leaving the country if they were born there. If there's a fire, they must save a picture of their leader first. And if there are tourists, the locals cannot talk to them. In our national anthem, it says, "For the land of the free and the home of the brave." Wow. The land of the free. That is patriotism, and that is the Bill of the Rights. When it was made in 1887, it was made because we the people wanted to have civil rights. So the government could not take away our newly found freedom and have unfair laws. Therefore, to this day, we still have the same rights such as freedom of speech, press, and religion.
But most people believe that the civil rights and equal rights are the same. This is not true. Equal rights is where you have rights no matter your color or your gender. However, civil rights is where you have rights in general, or in other words, freedoms listed in our Bill of Rights. Civil rights may not seem like that big of a deal, but it is really important. In fact, it was inspired by Thomas Jefferson and later written by James Madison. Jefferson and Madison were both very patriotic people. After it was made, it was then sent to the states for their approval, and the Congress signed it in September 25th to show that they agreed with the 10 amendments. This goes to show how important it really was. Though this may not be my opinion, though this may not be your opinion, and that is okay, because we all have our own opinions. After all, that is what the Bill of Rights is all about.
Theodore Roosevelt once said, "This country won't be a good place for any of us to live in unless we make it a good place for all of us to live in." What this quote says to me is that we should have responsibilities to our fellow Americans. Good morning, everyone. My name is Amelia Perry. Responsibilities of most Americans can range from working at a job to caring for a family member or even completing schoolwork. One responsibility that we should prioritize is the well-being of America's future, children. Kids like me are important assets in the future of America, and we must nourish each child and young adult to be independent and intelligent citizens. How does responsibility relate to patriotism, you may ask? In order to answer this question, we must first look at what these words mean. Responsibility means the state or fact of having a duty to deal with something or having control over someone. Patriotism is devotion to and vigorous support of one's country. It is difficult to relate these two words, as patriotism requires responsibility, but responsibility does not need patriotism. Given this, both can still work unanimously in our everyday lives. One important responsibility we hold to our youth is providing good education. If we look at Arizona in particular, we will see that we are ranked 46th out of the 50 states in District of Columbia as far as overall education, and even lower in funding. When I read this, my first thought was that we aren't prioritizing this very important aspect in our future. However, I looked at the 2021 budget summary and predictions, and I was impressed. Much of the funding was going towards schools, but there's still a lot more we could do to improve Arizona's public education system. This isn't just a responsibility for schools. It is something that can be taken up at home as well. All people should strive to advance the next generation. One thought is that we need to make sure American students can speak 2 or more languages. There is no doubt that being bilingual helps in a lot of aspects of life, such as finding jobs and international travel. Given these points and others not mentioned, teaching foreign languages is an opportunity often overlooked in school curriculum. I go to Santa Fe, and we have an amazing immersion program. I have been learning Spanish every school day for 8 years, and it has helped me in my ability to speak and understand Spanish. Without this program, I would only be able to speak a small amount of Spanish, but because my parents enrolled me in Santa Fe, I know enough Spanish to converse and maybe even travel. While mine and my classmates' Spanish has improved, many other kids my age across the United States cannot converse in another language. We see places like the UK and Sweden where they have good bilingual programs in their schools. We should strive to implement good practices into our own society, such as bilingual education. Another important responsibility we have is to make sure the majority of kids go to college or trade school. I've recently started looking at tuition prices to start planning for college, and I was shocked. I immediately thought to myself, there's no way I'm doing this without a loan or a scholarship. It's sad I must think like that, but it is expected. College is expensive, and with the master to PhD degree I want, it isn't getting any cheaper. There are jobs today that do not require a degree, but kids like me who want to go into psychology, or people like my friend who want to be an engineer, or people who want to do basically any other high-paying job out there need a degree of some sort. Knowing this, all people who are able to vote should pick people to represent us that will fight for this cause. I know I will. Finally, we have the responsibility to treat mental health issues in young Americans. Many times, young people, especially kids, get left out of conversations around mental health. This can be for many different reasons, but whatever it is, we have the responsibility to care for children's mental health as well. I believe that if we take up these responsibilities previously mentioned, America will be a better place for all. Give a man a fish and you will feed him for a day. Teach a man to fish and you will feed him for a lifetime. Children are going to be the next doctors, lawyers, and teachers of America. If we take up these responsibilities, we can be almost sure that the future is bright, and we will have created a good America for the next generation. I'm not saying that if we do this, our society will automatically become a perfect utopia, but I know for a fact that it will change America for the better. I will leave you all with one more thought. How can we, as a society, do as President Roosevelt suggested and make America good for all? Thank you.
Love, generosity, duty, and patriotism is what gives America its greatness. Barack Obama. Welcome, parents, judges, and fellow contestants. My name is Valeria Valdez, and today I will be talking about patriotism. A very important part of being a patriot is working together to make the United States a good place to live for everyone. By all working together and having a sense of love and dedication to our country, we can build a united and prosperous nation. This country will not be a good place for any of us to live in unless we make it a good place for all of us to live in. Theodore Roosevelt. One of the main arguments in favor of patriotism is that it promotes unity and national pride. When citizens have a strong sense of love and devotion to their country, they are more likely to work together to achieve common goals and defend their nation in times of crisis. This was evident after the terrorist attack of September 11, when the country came together in a show of solidarity and determination. Another argument in favor of patriotism is that it encourages citizens to be active and engaged in the political process. For me, patriotism is more than loyalty to a place on the map. It is respect for certain values, for a way of thinking. And this can only happen in a place like the United States. Barack Obama. When people have a deep sense of pride and loyalty to their country, they are more likely to participate in elections and advocate for policies that they believe will benefit their nation. When people have a deep sense of pride and loyalty to their country, they are more likely to participate in elections and advocate for policies that they believe will benefit their nation. This active participation in the political process is essential to the functioning of a healthy democracy. However, some argue that patriotism can be taken too far and lead to nationalism and even intolerance and advocates aggressions against other nations. Extreme forms of patriotism can lead to a feeling of superiority over other nations and cultures and can justify aggressive actions against perceived enemies. This can be dangerous as it can lead to conflicts and wars. We must work to build a country where everyone feels valued and respected, regardless of ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, or other differences. In doing so, we are working to make the United States a truly good place to live for all. In conclusion, patriotism is an emotion that can have both positive and negative effects. When it promotes unity, national pride, and encourages citizens to be active and engaged in the political process, it can be a force for good. However, when it becomes extreme, it can have dangerous and destructive consequences. Don't ask yourself what your country can do for you. Ask yourself what you can do for your country. John F. Kennedy. Thank you.
It is believed by many that Abraham Lincoln is the most influential president to ever serve this greatest country ever founded. During a speech in 1856, Abraham Lincoln made known his allegiance to the United States Constitution. Don't interfere with anything in the Constitution. That must be maintained, for it is the only safeguard of our liberties. He said these words as he led the country through the Civil War. Then, in 1858, President Lincoln cemented his loyalty to the Constitution as he gave authority to its impact in a Civil War victory speech. The prosperity of the United States is not the result of accident. Without the Constitution and the Union, we could not have attained the result. The United States Constitution is a living document, alive in our very system, whose original meaning still holds true today. Meaning filled with truth, freedom, and godliness. I define truth as that which is fact or reality. Truth is genuine, objective, and real. Clarence Thomas, the second African American elected to the Supreme Court and a self-proclaimed supporter of the original Constitution, holds to this same high standard of truth. As a currently sitting judge in the highest court in the land, Judge Thomas defends his position in this way. Relying on the original meaning of the Constitution rests on two self-evident truths. The idea that words mean something, and the government is of the people, by the people, and for the people. This idea that words mean something is to say, the Constitution means something. Ben Shapiro, a Harvard Law graduate and conservative thinker, professes, the truth of this document argues to protect and preserve the values and principles that have made our nation great. King George restricted speech, limiting the free expression of thought. Despite the great sacrifices of the Founding Fathers and supporters, a similar attempt made its way into today's American politics and culture. Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr. encouraged his listeners to always remember, if there is anything that must be brought to attention in the Constitution, it is the principle of free thought. Not free thought for those who agree with us, but the freedom for the thought that we hate. This thought should encourage and remind us to embrace the freedoms expressed in the Constitution, even when it isn't comfortable. John Adams spoke of freedom in this way. You will never know how much it has cost my generation to preserve your freedoms. I hope you will make good use of it. This statement reminds me of how thankful I am for my father and his father's service in the U.S. military. Some sacrificed some, and some sacrificed all. Benjamin Franklin speaks of the influence and involvement of God in the writing of the most inspired American document. I can hardly conceive a moment of such momentous importance to the welfare of millions now existing and to exist in the future generations of this great nation, that anything should pass without being in some degree influenced, guided, and governed by God's power. If indeed the Constitution was influenced by a desire to honor God, then it is as relative today as it was at its foundation. Hebrews 13:8 declares, God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. God is always good, always loving, always all-powerful. No matter how this world changes around us, we can trust God is consistent. I trust God is consistent. I am convinced the original meaning of the Constitution is as wonderful and powerful today as it ever was. In its original form and most simple understanding flows the power of truth, freedom, and godliness. Patriotism can be defined as the feeling of attachment or commitment to one's country, nation, or political community. In my humble opinion, patriotism cannot exist without a common understanding of the values, morals, and ethics by which a people are governed. For the United States of America and its citizens, the governing authority for how we live is the Constitution, past, present, and future.
Once upon a time, there was a great kingdom. The citizens in that kingdom had a great many responsibilities. Sometimes it was feared that they took those responsibilities for granted. So one day, a great philosopher wrote, "This country will not be a good place for any of us to live in unless we make it a good place for all of us to live in." Good morning, judges, parents, and fellow contestants. My name is Monica Moses. That great philosopher talked about was actually Theodore Roosevelt. And his quote got me thinking, what are our responsibilities? Let me tell you, we as citizens do have responsibility to each other and our country, such as treating our fellow citizens with kindness and respect, our duty to serve our country, and our right to freedom of speech. My first responsibility to share with you today is treating our fellow citizens with kindness and respect. There are things that some of us say to each other that are thought of as jokes, but really aren't. They can be quite hurtful and thought of as inappropriate or even bullying. And did you know, the causes of most school violences are bullying, fighting, robbery, weapon possession, and verbal threats? In 2022, there were 51 school shootings, and the causes of those school shootings were 1, that they wanted to get back at those who had hurted them, and 2, bullying. 10.6% of youth suffer from severe depression, but way more than that put themselves down due to the peer pressure they receive from us, that we receive from each other. We really do need to treat each other with a little more kindness and respect. Another responsibility we have, or well, more of a right, is freedom of speech. I call it a responsibility when we take that right for granted. In China, people get imprisoned because they spoke their mind. Human rights lawyer Yu Wencheng was detained in January 2018 and sentenced to 4 years in Nanjing prison, all because he criticized President Xi Jinping. Imagine if those were our standards every time someone criticized President Biden. In India, their government guarantees freedom of speech, but several sections of their penal code criminalizes it, such as Section 298, which outlaws uttering any word or making any sound with a deliberate intent of wounding the religious feelings of any person. And think of it this way, our government protects our right to speak out against them. We really do take this amazing right for granted sometimes. We need to own up for what we say or express and realize how lucky you are to live in this amazing country. My final responsibility to share with you today is our duty to serve our country. The military is an amazing way to serve, but it does not have to always mean that. There are people, especially in the past few years, who have been serving diligently every single day, like doctors, nurses, firefighters, and police officers. Also, teachers and principals, whose #1 priority is their students' safety. Any other person our age and above can also offer service, like community service or volunteer work. And I like to say, moms and dads offer the best service. They raise those who fight for and protect us today. Whenever you get the chance, thank your mom, dad, or maybe even your teacher for all the help they've given you to become the person you are today. To conclude my fine tale, the citizens stood there in awe of the great philosopher's story and took better mind of their actions, rights, and responsibilities. As you walk away today, remember how lucky you are to live in a country where you can speak your mind, your duty to serve your country, and to treat those around you with respect and kindness. Thank you.
Just imagine the world that we live in without the freedoms and protections our founding fathers sacrificed so much for. America was born on July 4th, 1776, and it is our duty as citizens to preserve the values that our country was built on. Welcome, fellow Americans. My name is Danica Dworshak. Theodore Roosevelt stated, "This country will not be a good place for any of us to live in unless we make it a good place for all of us to live in." When I hear this quote, I think of how we, as citizens, can make it a good place for all of us. I feel it is our responsibility to our fellow citizens to get involved in our communities, fulfilling our civic duties, and to participate in voting. To start off,
Volunteering helps contribute to making our communities a better place to live in. Think about it. Each of us belong to many communities such as work, church, school, and we help in so many ways. For example, collecting food or clothes for those in need, donating blood, or even helping rebuild homes after a natural disaster, to name a few. This is beneficial because when we see an issue, we can change the outcome by finding a solution to the problem. Another way is to get involved in a community service project that you feel passionate about. To give you an idea, my brother and I want to make our local law enforcement feel appreciated for all that they do keeping us safe. We applied for and received a butterfly grant. We passed out and collected 300 appreciation cards signed by citizens along with snacks labeled, "We back our blue, we appreciate you," and delivered them to local peer precincts. This shows in any need you can be of service to, the reward in the end is seeing the difference you can make in people's lives that are in need and giving them support. We can agree that working together to improve our communities has such a positive impact for generations to come. Next, performing our civic duties is another responsibility we should engage in to secure a better place to live in. One of the most important is obeying the laws which benefits all citizens to live together peacefully in a safe environment. Visualize what our world would be like if we didn't have to obey the laws. It would be utter chaos. For instance, what if there is no law requiring seatbelts or driving behind the wheel under the influence? The result would cause many more accidents and deaths to occur. This proves we need laws to keep order in society so our actions and choices have consequences. Another civic duty is we must prepare to serve on a jury when summoned. This guarantees in the Constitution for citizens to have their Sixth Amendment right to trial by jury to decide whether a person is guilty or innocent. An additional civic duty is to register with the Selective Service. All men aged 18 through 25 are required to with the government. This shows how important it is for a nation to continue to be protected when called upon to do so by defending the many rights we hold dear. Lastly, how does participating in voting and democracy make it a good place for all of us to live in? To explain, when I was a young girl, the thought of being a queen someday seemed to be a cool idea. But as I grew up, I realized, what if we were ruled by a queen and she passed any law she wished to? On the other hand, with a democracy, laws are voted on and chosen by we, the people. In addition, we have three branches called the legislative, executive, and judicial that keep our system balanced, so no one person can have all the power like a queen. In our country, we can picture citizens gathering from all around our 50 states, lining up for the most important days in our nation, Election Day, to cast their vote, to have their voice heard on deciding who we want to represent us. We must make informed decisions while respecting the rights and opinions of others. Voting allows us to choose what is better for the world and create changes for the times that lie ahead of us. In summary, remember, we cannot change the past, but we can learn lessons from it to grow together towards building the future of this world a better place to live in by being involved in our communities, fulfilling our civic duties, and participate in voting. I will leave you with this quote by President John F. Kennedy. And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. Meaning, it is up to us how we make this world a better place to live in. Citizenship bonds us as Americans, and we can lead by example for future generations to follow.